I have given you several hat-themed logic puzzles to do. Good luck. You are a detective at the annual hat convention, and you have discovered something terrible. A hat enthusiast was murdered. You have 3 suspects that could have done it, all with different hats. You know from your investigation that the person who wore the jester hat was the killer, and that the suspects are bound by hat law to be truthful, but you don't know whose hat is whose. The suspects have told you: 1. Neither Annie nor Cherry wore the top hat. 2. If and only if Bill wore the top hat, Annie wore the sun hat. Who wore the jester hat? If you're a fan of logic puzzles like this, I would encourage you to pause the video now and figure it out for yourself. This one's quite easy. Did you figure it out? Now, with riddles like this, information is often hidden or disguised or said in a strange way. Fortunately, here it's not too difficult to decode. We can use a spreadsheet like this to make the job easier. Now, let's look at the first clue. Neither Annie nor Cherry wore the top hat. That means that by process of elimination, Bill must have worn the top hat, which means that according to clue 2, Annie is the one wearing the sun hat, which leaves Cherry as the only one left who could have worn the jester hat, making her the killer. Alright, let's do a bit of a harder one now. In another part of the hat convention, you found a ring of sinister top hat wearing criminals who plan to steal all of the hats and replace every one with a top hat. Hat size corresponds to rank, and you need to know the rank of the 4 members you've found to be able to successfully foil their plot. By questioning outsiders, you've gathered the following evidence. 1. Each of the 4 members have different sized hats. 2. Bill's top hat is larger than Claire's. 3. Elliot's hat is either 1 size larger or 1 size smaller than Dennis. 4. If Claire's hat is the largest, Dennis' hat is the smallest. Otherwise, Dennis' hat is the largest. Who has what sized hat? Again, pause the video now to figure it out for yourself. This puzzle may seem impossible because no one's hat size is directly told to us. In fact, the only piece of information that we know for sure is that Bill's hat is larger than Claire's. This means that Claire's hat can't be the largest because Bill's hat will always be larger than hers, which means that Dennis' hat must be the largest because Claire's hat is not. Elliot's hat can't be larger than the largest hat, which means that Elliot must have the second largest, leaving Bill with the third largest and Claire with the smallest. Alright, to those of you who are still keeping up, let's do a third riddle. Oh no! Some of the remaining members of the Top Hat criminal ring have gone ahead with their plan, and furthermore, they have broken hat law, and now every single statement that they make is a lie. Some of the normal hat enthusiasts have had their hat replaced with a top hat, making them identical to the Top Hat criminal ring, except that they always tell the truth. In this group of 6 people, who is a Top Hat criminal? Alan says there are exactly 3 top hats here, and Beth is one of them. Beth says Alan is a top hat, and both Fred and Duncan are top hats. Clive says, I am not a top hat, and neither is Beth. Duncan says, Emmett is not a top hat. Emmett says, if Beth is a top hat, then so is Fred. Fred says, there are 4 top hats
here. It is important to note that if a both statement is false, one of the people in the both statement can still be assigned the correct identity as long as they are not both assigned the correct identity in that statement. Who are the top hat criminals? Did you solve it? It can be a good strategy to assume that something is true or false, and then, if it contradicts itself, it can't be the case. Let's start by assuming that Alan is telling a lie, making him a top hat. This means that Beth must be telling the truth, which means that Clive is also a truth teller. Since Beth says that Duncan is a top hat, and we are assuming that she is telling the truth, Duncan must be a top hat, which means that Emmett is also a top hat. But wait a moment, if we take Beth on her word here, Fred is a top hat, making there be exactly 4 top hats, which makes Fred be telling the truth, creating a paradox. This means that our original assumption must be false, and so we can assume that Alan must be telling the truth, which means that we can further conclude that Duncan and Emmett are also telling the truth, while Fred, Beth, and Clive are top hats. Phew, that was a bit tricky, but if you were keeping up, you should have been able to put it together. Now, let's do one last riddle. This one will use all of the strategies that you've seen for the past puzzles. Good luck. The Top Hat criminal ring has put into motion the final stage of their plan. Some people are top hat criminals and some are not. Furthermore, some criminals have switched back to truth-telling just to mess with you, and some non-top hats are being mind-controlled, so that every one of their statements is a lie despite them not being top hats. You must figure out who is who and whether they are lying or telling the truth. Annie says, "I am a lying top hat, and Dominic is as well." Bob says, "Kathy and Frankie are top hats." Kathy says, "Bob is not a top hat, and nor am I, and neither of us are lying." Dominic says, "I am not a top hat, and neither are Annie or Ellie." But Kathy is a top hat. Ellie says, "Dominic is lying and also a top hat." Frankie says, "Gerald is lying and a top hat, but everyone else is truthful." Gerald says, "There is at least one of each type of person. Who is mind-controlled? Who is not? Who is a top hat? Who is not?" Wow, that was a very difficult riddle. Massive props to you if you solved it. If you did manage to figure it out, you should have gotten Annie, mind-controlled; Bob, truthful top hat; Kathy, lying top hat; Dominic, not a top hat; Ellie, mind-controlled; Frankie, lying top hat; Gerald, not a top hat. And those are the answers. You are most likely quite exhausted from all of this riddle solving, but I see the small proportion of my viewers who are itching for more. So let's do one last bonus riddle. The answer to this one will be in the pinned comment. At this hat convention, there are 3 types of people. Sun hat wearers, who always tell the truth; top hat wearers, who always lie; and jesters, who can make statements that are either true or false. Everyone has removed their hat, so you have no idea who is what. Fizz says, "I am a jester, but Harry and Kim are not." Greg says Harry wears the same hat as me, but a different hat to Jeff. Harry says Iggy is a jester and Kim is not a sun hat. Iggy says Kim is a sun hat and so is Fizz. Jeff says Fizz and Iggy have different hats. Kim says I am a sun hat, but Greg is a top hat and Harry is a top hat. Then Fizz says I am a top hat and my last statement was a lie. Jeff says there are only top hats. Kim says I am a jester and not the same as Jeff. What are everyone's identities?